September 1408, Hvalsey Church, Greenland, a wedding. Sigridar Björnsdottir and Thorstein Olafsson are being married. The ceremony is conducted according to the Catholic rite, in Latin, by a Norse priest, in a stone church that the Norse Greenland colony had built approximately 200 years earlier. The guests are Norse Greenlanders, people whose families had been living in Greenland for 400 years, whose ancestors had sailed from Iceland with Eric the Red around 985 AD and built the first Norse farms, who had maintained trade with Iceland and Norway across 4 centuries of North Atlantic crossings, who had sent walrus ivory to the markets of Europe, who had sent live polar bears to the King of Norway, who had sent tribute to the Pope, who had built churches, farms, legal assemblies, and a functioning society, who were, in 1408, still here, still functioning, still conducting weddings with proper Catholic ceremony and record-keeping. The record of this wedding survives in the Icelandic annals. It is the last written document produced by the Norse Greenland colony. After this date, silence, complete silence, for decades, and then European ships reaching the abandoned settlements, finding the longhouses, still standing, the household objects, still in place, the graves, still in the ground, and no people, anywhere. What happened to the 10,000 Norse people who had been living in Greenland is the greatest mystery in Viking Age history, and it has never been fully solved. To understand the mystery of the Norse Greenland collapse, you first need to understand what the colony actually was. Not the romantic version, the reality. At its peak, approximately 1200 AD, the Norse Greenland settlement comprised 2 main areas. The eastern settlement near the southern tip of Greenland, the western settlement further north. Combined population estimates range from 2,000 to 10,000 people. Farming communities, not primarily hunters, farmers, with cattle, sheep, and goats grazing on the patches of vegetation in the fjord valleys. Churches, at least 12 documented churches in the eastern settlement alone. The cathedral at Gardar, the administrative and religious infrastructure of a serious medieval community. The Althing, a legal assembly, a functioning political structure. Trade, regular ships from Iceland and Norway. The colony exported walrus ivory and imported timber, iron, grain, and luxury goods. This was not a desperate fringe settlement. This was a functioning Norse community that had maintained itself for 400 years in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. Through the Little Ice Age, the period of climatic cooling that began around 1300 AD and made conditions significantly harsher, through the Black Death, which devastated the populations of Iceland and Norway that the Greenland colony depended on for trade, through the Inuit expansion into southern Greenland, the Thule people moving south as the ice conditions shifted. Through all of this, the Greenland Norse survived, until they didn't. The theories? There are many. Climate change. The Little Ice Age cooling reduced the growing season in Greenland. Pasture land that had been marginal became unusable. The cattle that the Norse depended on for food and economic production began to die. The colony slowly starved. This is the most widely cited explanation. It is supported by paleoclimatic data that documents the cooling trend. It is supported by the archaeological evidence of declining herd sizes in the later periods of the settlement. It is not a complete explanation, because people facing starvation do not usually sit in their longhouses with their furniture in place and disappear quietly. They migrate. Disease. The Black Death, which reached Iceland in 1389, may have reached Greenland, a community of 10,000 with limited immunity facing a pandemic that killed up to half of Europe could have been catastrophically reduced. This is possible. There is no direct archaeological evidence confirming plague in Greenland, but the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence in an environment as difficult to excavate as Greenland. The trade collapse. The regular ships from Iceland and Norway stopped coming. Not because the colonies wanted them to stop, because the economics changed. Walrus ivory, the primary Greenland export, was being undercut by elephant ivory arriving from Africa. The market for walrus ivory collapsed. The economic justification for the dangerous North Atlantic crossing to Greenland collapsed with it. Without regular ship contact, the colony was cut off. From supplies, from news, from the reinforcement of population. A community cut off from the outside world, in an environment that does not produce sufficient surplus to sustain itself indefinitely. This is the most economically complete explanation, but it still does not explain what happened to the people. The Inuit theory. The Thule Inuit were expanding into southern Greenland in the same period the Norse colony was declining. Archaeological evidence documents Inuit presence in areas adjacent to Norse settlements. Saga accounts mention conflict between Norse and Inuit. Some historians proposed the collapse was accelerated by Inuit violence, raids, economic competition, or sustained pressure on a weakening community. Others argue that the evidence supports coexistence rather than conflict, and that the Norse refusal to adopt Inuit survival strategies, the hunting techniques, the kayak technology, was the real factor. Not Inuit aggression, Norse rigidity. The inability to become something different enough to survive in an environment that had become too different from what they were built for. In 2012, a team of researchers published a paper that changed the framework of the mystery. They had been analyzing the bones from the Norse Greenland graveyards, not for cause of death, for diet, specifically for the ratio of marine to terrestrial protein in the bone collagen. This ratio, measurable through isotopic analysis, tells you what the person ate across their lifetime. A person who ate primarily land-based food, cattle, sheep, grain, has a specific isotopic signature. A person who ate primarily marine food, seal, whale, fish, has a different one. The Norse Greenland graves showed a striking pattern across the chronology of the settlement. Early period, 900s to 1100s AD, the isotopic signature was primarily terrestrial. These were people eating what Norse farmers ate: cattle, sheep, some grain imported from Iceland. Later period, 1200s to 1400s AD, the isotopic signature had shifted dramatically toward marine protein. The people of the late Norse Greenland settlement were eating substantially more seal and marine mammal than their ancestors had. They had adapted, partially. They had shifted their diet toward the marine resources that the Inuit had been successfully living on. They had not fully made the transition. They were still farming, still keeping cattle where possible, still maintaining the Norse cultural identity, the churches, the legal assemblies, the social structures of a farming people. But they were eating more seal, a people caught between two worlds. The world they had been built for, and the world they were actually in, partially adapted, not completely. And here is the conclusion that the researchers drew carefully. A partial adaptation is more precarious than either full adaptation or no adaptation. The Norse Greenlanders who were still farming in a climate that could no longer reliably support farming, who were dependent on marine resources but had not developed the full technological infrastructure, the kayak, the specific hunting techniques that made the Inuit successful, were in a position where a bad year could cascade quickly into catastrophe. A harsh winter that killed the remaining cattle, a failed seal hunt season, a ship from Iceland that did not come. Any one of these in a fully adapted society would be a serious problem. In a partially adapted society that was already on the margin, it could be the final cascade. Here is the element of the Norse Greenland mystery that the historical accounts preserve without fully understanding. The last generations knew. The last people to live in the Norse Greenland settlements knew that something was ending. We can infer this from what they left behind. The objects in the abandoned longhouses are not the objects of people who left in a hurry. They are the objects of people who left deliberately. The furniture is arranged. The tools are organized. The spaces have the quality of rooms that were put in order before being abandoned, not left mid-activity, closed. The archaeologists who excavated the Norse Greenland sites in the 20th century noted this. The sites did not have the chaos of sudden abandonment. They had the order of deliberate departure. People who knew they were leaving and prepared accordingly. But where did they go? The most likely answer, the answer that the genetic evidence increasingly supports, is Iceland. The Norse Greenland settlers in the final generations of the colony were not dying in place. They were leaving, taking ships, the few ships that still connected Greenland to Iceland, and going to Iceland, or dying at sea attempting to. The population did not vanish. It migrated, not in a single dramatic exodus, over decades, one ship at a time, one family at a time, until the community was too small to sustain the social infrastructure, the churches, the legal assemblies, that made it a community, and then the last people left, or died, in longhouses that they had put in order before they went, as if they expected to come back, or as if they knew they would not, and wanted to leave things properly, as the Norse always had. Hvalsey Church still stands, the stone walls, the door opening facing east, the specific orientation of a Catholic church maintained by Norse Greenlanders who had been Christian for 400 years, who had built this church with stone carried from the surrounding fjord valleys, who had worshipped in it across 15 or 20 generations, who had conducted weddings in it, including the last one, in 1408. The church is a ruin now. The roof is gone. The interior is open to the Greenland sky, but the walls are standing. Stone, the material the Norse used when they needed something to last. Standing. In the Greenland summer, when the sky is clear, and the fjord is calm and the light has the specific quality of a high-latitude summer day, long, golden, horizontal, Hvalsey Church is a remarkable thing to see. Not because it is large. It is not large. Because of what it represents, a community that built in stone, that maintained the social and religious infrastructure of organized civilization, on the edge of the habitable world, for 400 years. That came to an end not in a single dramatic event, but in the slow, grinding, barely documented process of a community that ran out of the conditions it needed to continue, and left, in order. The last people in Hvalsey Church, after the 1408 wedding, after the last ceremony, after the last record, they walked out the east-facing door. They looked at the fjord. They made whatever decision people make when they understand that the place they are leaving will not have anyone in it after they go. And they went. The church has been empty for 600 years. The stone walls hold. The door opening still faces east, the specific orientation that Christianity gave to its churches, toward the rising sun, toward what comes after darkness, still facing it, 600 years after the last person went through it, still standing, in the specific way that stone stands, not because it resists, because it endures. The Norse built it, the Norse left, the stone stayed, as stone does, through everything, still there, still facing east, still waiting for someone to come back who is never coming back.